What's going on, guys? Aaron from Top Tier Gaming here, and today I'm coming at you with a discussion sort of talking about the format we're currently in, which is post Cyberstorm access, but pre-ban list. And, we've all sort of been waiting for a ban list for about a week or 2 weeks now, depending on when you've exactly been thinking a ban list was going to come out. However, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but a ban list is just not coming out. And at this point, I don't know if I'm talking about this week, maybe ever. I think maybe 2027 we can expect the next ban list. But for now, I want to talk about sort of Cyberstorm access and where we're at now, because I made a lot of videos a couple weeks ago talking about, decks and cards that were going to be good if we got into a true Cyberstorm access meta, which really looks like Super Heavy Samurai would be the best deck, and like Pearly's really strong, Math Mech's really good, and decks like Kashtira, Sprite, Runic, those decks would sort of fall by the wayside, and technically one of those has happened. But with all that sort of wrapped up, it's going to be talking about that in detail in this video, sort of the summary of the format and where it is now, and what you can kind of expect, assuming there's no ban list for the foreseeable future. Before we hop into it, I do want to let you guys know Discord link down below, along with all of my other social media links. Also, I'm trying to hit 15,000 subscribers, so if you do enjoy this Yu-Gi-Oh content and you like what you see here, feel free to like and subscribe. It really helps me out and what I do here on the channel. And without further ado, let's start talking about the meta and where we are now. So, talking about decks that have continued to see play, and I don't have like any spreadsheets open right now, so it's from the spreadsheets I have seen and sort of profiles and what's been topping at regionals is where all my information is sort of coming from. We have Kashtira, which still presents itself as sort of the best deck in the format. I'll use Fenrir to sort of represent Kashtira, or you know what might be better? We'll use Unicorn to represent Kashtira here on this dueling book page, and yeah, Kashtira is still looking like the dominant deck. It did the best at some of the European nationals this past couple weekends, and it's done extremely well at our regionals as well. Kashtira, I mean, just the fact that Arise Heart is putting up a Macro Cosmos, it's gatekeeping the decks we expected to be the best, and that presents itself with a pretty big issue, which I'll get into in a little bit, where why Kashtira still being good is really awkward in this format for a couple of reasons, but one I want to talk about in particular. Then, of course, we have Super Heavy Samurai, which I think is still representing itself as maybe like the second best deck, arguably. I think it's no surprise to people that Super Heavy Samurai is this good. We kind of knew it would be. Essentially, it's just like the one-card combo decks of the past taken up to an 11, right? Like, we've seen one-card combos in Salamangreat. We've seen them in Marincess. We've seen them in things like even Infernoble with like Connector. One-card combos have existed for a while, but I think that, Super Heavy Samurai have just taken it to the max. Like, what a one-card combo does in that deck, leading to like 5 to 6 like true interruptions with follow-up, and arguably even if you break the board, they'll have 3 hand traps with it. It is actually ridiculous what one card can do for that deck, how consistent it is, and how many defensive cards it gets to play. Of course, with the downside that it can't run spell and traps. So I don't think it's a surprise that this deck is that good. Like, it's a little too good to be honest, but it's not as silly as full power Kashtira, obviously, or metas of the past like Tearlaments, right? Like, it's a completely fine deck that has a lot of hard counters to where it can be beaten. So it's not like a problem, but it is kind of annoying that Kashtira is still as popular as it is, and it is gatekeeping this deck. So then we have Pearly's a big one I wanted to talk about, because this deck I feel like has not been doing as well as we predicted. It's been doing fine, don't get me wrong, the deck is solid, and no like downsides with the deck really as far as how it's doing. I just feel like people expected it to be doing a little more than it really is. I'm not saying it's doing bad again, but I think it was expected of more, but it's still fine. It's solid. It is again being kind of gatekept by Kashtira though, because it obviously doesn't like Macro Cosmos as well. We have decks like Math Mech, which are sort of like continuing from last format, that are still completely viable. In fact, I still think Math Mech is incredibly strong. But, these are the 4 decks I want to talk about the most. Actually, I do want to bring up Runic very briefly. I feel like Runic has sort of left the limelight. We saw Runic Naturia go from what is essentially the 3rd or 4th best deck in the format to almost non-existent, it feels like. And I feel like a big part of that is either, Exterio, or Spell Canceller is a big one. Like, this card might be single-handedly making Runic go away. Obviously, Super Heavy Samurai is putting these up. they're either putting up this or Exterio, depending on which route they're going for, either Cyberstein or just searching this off of Genius. Yeah, they go for this quite often, so yeah, Spell Canceller could be the reason. Runic's kind of subsided. Obviously, we still have Sprite that does, like, okay enough. We have things like Rika, which are doing solid enough as well. Like, these decks are all fine, but these are the 4 decks I want to talk about the most because they really feel like the top contenders to me. I hope I'm not missing one. Also, Labyrinth has been doing okay, surprisingly. I'm going to put Stovey here because I feel like Furniture Labyrinth is one of the better versions. But yeah, so one thing with this format and what to take going forward, if we're going to exist in this Post Cyac meta with no ban list, and also one of the reasons I'm uploading this, by the way, I know this is a little late, this probably should have been in the intro, but one reason I upload these videos talking about no ban list is I feel like if I keep uploading these, eventually Konami will just release a ban list to spite me. Obviously not literally because, you know, why, but it's just like a funny, you know, karma thing, right? Yeah, one thing I want to mention about all these decks is the biggest card this format, everyone knows it, it's Droll and Lockbird, right? Like, Droll is the counter to the format. Now, my issue with Droll and Lockbird is that essentially every deck is playing this card and almost every deck just loses to this card. I feel like it hits Super Heavy Samurai the most. It hits Math Mech very hard if they're getting like a Signet Mining or a Small World Search to start their turn. It hits Pearly sometimes it doesn't hit Pearly that bad, but it can hinder them quite a bit. And it hits Kashtira really bad in the hands where they open Prosperity, or Terraforming, or Wraithsoth. So Droll is presenting itself as a problem in the format. Like, whether or not we have a ban list, or didn't have a ban list, like, Droll was still going to be good. And while Droll is sort of a problem card, I feel like we need it. I wouldn't want to play in a Super Heavy Samurai format without Droll and Lockbird. Like, there's almost no other card that can hinder this deck to where it needs to be, where it's like a fine deck that is beatable. Even though Droll is kind of toxic, like, I feel like we need it. A card I want to talk about that I feel like is punished the most by not having a ban list and Kashtira still being dominant is Dimension Shifter. I think Dimension Shifter is an insane card this format. I think everyone's sort of caught on to that by now. I mean, these 3 decks get pretty bodied by this card. I've seen Pearly side it briefly. I don't know if they're still doing that. I saw them side it briefly just to like make Zeus under it, and it beats Super Heavy. But then Super Heavy started playing more Baguska, and then they stopped really being able to play Shifter. I feel like this card's weird and Pearly, but this card dominates. Now the issue is, it's hard to run like D-Shifter decks like Fluandereeze, just because they can play D-Shifter to beat the meta, because Kashtira is still the best deck in the room, which makes D-Shifter really weird. And that is one thing about this sort of post-Cyac pre-Banlist meta that really grinds my gears, for lack of a better phrase, is D-Shifter should be like a dominant card, which I guess isn't like a great thing. I don't think anyone enjoys playing with Shifter in the format, but it would be a great meta call to play a deck that can run D-Shifter if Super Heavy Samurai was like the undisputed best deck, right? Or Math Mech was seeing a lot of play. Oh, that's one I was forgetting. People are going to get sort of upset that I didn't include this. Obviously, we have Branded that is a pretty serious contender as well. I mean, there's a lot of serious contenders this format. But yeah, like, Dimension Shifter should be insane, but because we don't have a ban list, it's kind of weird in the format, which is really problematic, I think. And same thing with Ghost Ogre to an extent. I think Ghost Ogre is still a great card, but it's nowhere near as good as it was predicted to be because we haven't had a ban list, right? And like, this is all, you know, I keep saying we're getting a ban list, and I'm assuming in this video that a ban list would hurt Kashtira. We could get a ban list, and all it does is like limit or just ban Diablosis, and Kashtira would still be an insane deck, and we'd still be in the spot we are in now. But this video sort of assumes that we'll have a ban list that shakes up the meta and hits Kashtira to a point where the other decks would thrive a little more, namely these two, because they are the new decks to talk about. I guess Manadium as well. I could have included Manadium a little earlier. We'll put Heart down here because this deck, I feel like, also gets hurt really bad by the Shifter effect, or the macro effect that Arise Heart puts up. There's cards that should be good that aren't, like Ghost Ogre, which I wanted to bring up here some more, and D-Shifter, that are really hindered by Kashtira, because Ogre, don't get me wrong, it's not terrible versus some game states of Kashtira. I know at the Houston Regional I went to 2 months ago, I played Ghost Ogre, and I played 7 Kashtiras that day, 6 or 7 Kashtiras, and Ghost Ogre was winning me games, because in the grind game, if you're able to hit Birth, or like Preparations, Ghost Ogre's insane versus that deck. But in a regular game state where they're just putting up a Rise Heart, this card's not even usable. And another thing to talk about Dimension Shifter is this card should be even better, because the cards like Droll and Lockbird and Ghost Ogre can't even be activated under this card. And I didn't want to make this video simply about D-Shifter, but I do think that's one of the things Kashtira is sort of gatekeeping from the format, is how playable this card really is, especially in main decks. Because it's hard to main 3D Shifter when Kashtira might be most of your matchups. And that's just the position we are in. I know an Evil Eye topped, which was hilarious, just talking more about the format. That was very funny. And they were actually citing the MathMech package. I thought that was hilarious. That's sort of the format we're in. Definitely a little weird, and it also, because like Kashtira is so good and these decks aren't thriving, I even think cards like Xyz Encore are a little weird as well. Like Xyz Encore is actually fine versus Kashtira, which gives this card another application, but we're seeing way less Pearly than I think was predicted, and therefore Xyz Encore might not be worth citing. And yeah, I feel like if we were in a format with Kashtira gone and Super Heavy Samurai was like undisputed the best deck, it'd be a little easier because there's so many cards that just destroy. Super Heavy, like Rainbow Magician. Let me just type in like this. Like, this card would see more play. This card's not seeing much play, especially because Super Heavy isn't quite that dominant yet. But if it was the best deck, you would see a lot more of this card, I think. And then Super Heavy Samurai would probably counterside a lot more for this as well. I don't know, I feel like I'm kind of rambling at this point. That's pretty much what I want to talk about, is sort of summarizing the meta we are in, and like things that, because Kashtira still exists and is probably the best deck, are altering what was predicted to be in this format. If I forgot anything or I'm missing something in the format, something you want to let me know, you can feel free to leave a comment down below. I'll be sure to read it. And yeah, any discussion you want down in the comments below, feel free to leave it. And yeah, that's going to be it for me. This has been Aaron from Top Tier Gaming. Bye, YouTube.